for my city manager's report, if you want to go to the next slide, what I'd like to do is defer my time to hand it over to Chief Kane, who's our battalion chief for the peninsula. And he's put together a presentation that will probably take about 15 to 20 minutes to get through. And I think it's very valuable information that not only our attending audience is going to benefit from, but also our viewing audience. It'll be preserved on our city's website. So before I invite you up, I do want to say that from I think everyone's perspective, the council, the public, what the fire department has done, the sheriff's department has done, the Los Angeles Police Department, the National Guard, everyone who's come out to protect and respond, you guys have done an incredible job. And Chief Kane, I'd like to give you all a round of applause for everything that you've done to help people out. So thank you. And if I can ask you to come up to the podium, and then we'll move our presentation over to your presentation.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, City Manager, members of the council, Acting Assistant Chief Brian Kane, Los Angeles County Fire Department. I'm here to give you a presentation on the events that recently taken place to the north of us at both the Palisades Fire and the Eaton Canyon Fire, and how some of those challenges and what we've done here on the peninsula to help mitigate some of those challenges. I like to open with this opening slide here. I think it's a great picture, but it also it shows exactly what the LA County Fire Department and the city has done to help solidify some of the safety challenges on the peninsula as it relates to wildland fires. So what you see here is a helicopter dip source. That's one of our helipods. It's placed at on Palos Verdes Drive over by Fire Station 53 at our helispot 53 Alpha is what we call it. And it's a self-filling water source that allows our Black Hawk there to pick up almost 1,200 gallons of water every time it dips into that tank. And that tank is on an automatic fill. It's connected to a domestic water source, and it enables that helicopter to load and return every 3 to 5 minutes. And just for reference, we will have 3 of these helicopters on every wildland fire response on the peninsula. So this is just to grab your attention, but also show you exactly with the commitment level that the fire department has for the peninsula. Next slide, please. So these are some of the numbers for as it relates to the Palisades Fire as it was this morning. So currently the Palisades Fire is 23,713 acres. It's 69% contained. I will go into detail later what containment actually means. There's 6,051 structures destroyed, 788 structures with damage. There's currently 3,123 firefighters working, 10 fatalities and 10 persons missing. One of the recent questions that I received was, what is considered a structure, and is a vehicle considered a structure? The answer to that question is a vehicle is not considered a structure and is not considered reflective in this structure destroyed or structure damaged. Where some of that confusion might have came from is what we consider as it relates to our search. So everything that can hold or house or contain a person needs to be searched. So our search occupancies, the count will be much, much higher. As it relates to structures destroyed, it's anything as far as a living dwelling to an outhouse to a shed to a barn to a stable to a garage and those like sources. Next slide, please. The Eaton Fire, currently 14,117 acres. It's 87% contained. 9,418 structures destroyed, 1,069 structures damaged. Currently, there's 2,408 firefighters working, 17 fatalities, and 8 persons missing. Today was a day of change as it relates to the weather and some of our containment numbers, as you've seen on these respective slides. So today was a day of demobilization. So we're in a rapid demobilization plan, and we're right-sizing the incident for the needs as it relates to the number of fire engines, fire personnel, overhead, et cetera, that are managing these current incidents. So we have search dogs, and we have even anthropologists that come in to search all of these structures. And we don't like to claim fatalities with 8 persons missing until they can be confirmed by either one of our cadaver dogs or anthropologists as far as sifting through rubble and distinguishing between burned items and actually burned human remains, et cetera. Next slide, please. So we hear on the weather all the time, red flag. And what does red flag actually mean? So there's a lot of science and a lot of numbers that are associated with red flag. But every red flag warning is precipitated by a red flag warning. A red flag warning is 12 to 48 hours before a projected red flag weather event. And there's a 50% likelihood that a warning will turn into an actual red flag condition. So red flag condition is what we're looking for 24 hours before an actual incident. And it has about an 80% chance of turning into an actual red flag event. Now, red flag or critical weather criteria is 10-hour fuel moisture of 10% or less, wind at 15 miles per hour or greater, and a relative humidity of 25%. So within this, our 10-hour fuel moistures is based on our relative humidity and our humidity recoveries overnight. So humidity fluctuates throughout the day based on high pressure and low pressure systems, and as well as daytime and nighttime. So when you have a relative humidity that's less than 25%, our fuel moistures are given off and received throughout the day based on the relative humidity. Live and dead fuel moistures do this, absorb and give off moistures. Repetitive days with less than 25%, those fuel moistures are just being emitted and not being reabsorbed for overnight recoveries, or because humidities are not, once again, raising in percentage. That's where you get that 10-hour fuel moistures at less than 10%, which of course, anything that's dry is much, much more volatile. Next slide, please. This is an actual picture here from the Eaton fire. This is the ember cast. Ember cast is all those little dots that are disseminated through these burning vegetation. In the Palisades in both Eaton fire, we were seeing wind anywhere from 55 to 80 miles an hour, and in some cases up to 90 miles an hour with gusts. So what I like to point out here is you don't really see a visible fire front, but you do see the ember cast. And look around at the picture and really look at what our picture is telling you. So you see a lot of different trees there, but what are the trees that are actually burning, and which ones are producing the biggest ember cast? So the answer is, of course, palm trees. We think of a palm tree as usually a very moist tropical plant, but in fire conditions, it's one of the trees that produces the biggest and most ember cast. Next slide, please. So with the ember cast, with the fire weather, looks like part of my slide's missing here. We create or calculate a probability of ignition. So we take all these numbers that we're gathering from weather, humidity, wind, live and dead fuel moistures, and we come up with a probability of ignition. With the probability of ignition, on a severe fire weather day with the relative humidity that we were seeing and the winds that we were seeing in the Palisades and both the Eaton incident, we came up with a probability of ignition of over 90%. What that basically is saying that every one of those embers that you saw on the previous slide is 90% of those are going to contribute to fire growth or ignite a receiving structure on the other end of that ember into, of course, more fire. Next slide, please. So I wanted to bring this up because I've been asked, what is the biggest one contributing thing that you can do to your structure to make sure that it is better than it was before, or to harden it somewhat from an ember cast? And you can get these vents. These vent systems are available, of course, online. There's lots of vendors for them. You can even get them at Home Depot. But these vents for subfloors and crawl spaces under your house, raised foundations, within your eaves, within your attic spaces, dormer vents, anything that is designed to let air flow throughout your respective house, you can get an ember-resistant vent for those areas. These ember-resistant vents are made to let the air keep flowing through to get the necessary ventilation that you need, but what it does is it traps the ember within the vent itself to keep it from going either inside your structure, under your house, or the worst case scenario in the attic. Next slide, please. Of course, the Ready, Set, Go program. The Ready, Set, Go program is designed for obviously vegetation management and respective vegetation distances for your house as it relates to fire weather and fire spread. The Ready, Set, Go program, everybody here should be very, very familiar with this. And all the resources are available, of course, on lacounty.org /RSG/. All of the resources for Ready, Set, Go as it relates to evacuations, preparedness for your vegetation, vegetation management, and also home hardening can be found on this respective website. Next slide, please. So I want to give you guys a little lesson on our modes of operation. So the news gives us a lot of great coverage, and it shows us out there doing what we do, of course. But a lot of times you will see, especially in initial action, what we call IA, is not a lot of hose pulling, not a lot of water spraying, not a lot of those things are actually happening. And why is that? The reason for that is we are in that initial action mode, we are in life mode. Our biggest consideration is preservation of life. What does that look like? That means evacuations, making sure that everybody that is still within the fire area is being told to go, notified to go, or being assisted to leave. So life mode is our #1 priority. If you see lots of fire apparatus driving around and it looks like you're kind of wondering, okay, exactly what are they doing? That's because they're still in life mode. When we know that life mode is pretty much satisfied, or we've done what we can for that significant mode, we'll now go into property conservation. Property conservation is either structure protection, where we put engines or apparatus on as many respective homes as we can, or it's called fire front following. The main fire front has gone through. We'll come back behind the fire, and now we'll start suppressing all the fires that had started from that fire front that came through that respective neighborhood. You might also think, well, there's lots of structures on fire and the fire department isn't doing anything. Well, we are very resource limited on these large scale fires, especially when we have multiple fires going at one time. So we have to kind of triage the structures that we attack. And the way that we do that is by a rule of 25%. If any respective structure is 25% or more involved, we kind of move on to the next one. I mean, it seems harsh, but we need to save what we can actually save, and the ones that are just gonna be not viable, we move on to the next. The one time that we will engage in a structure that is 25% or more involved is to save the houses that are in front, behind, or next to. So we're concentrating our efforts on this one to save the ones that are surrounding it. After property conservation, we go into perimeter control. Perimeter control is trying to keep the fire in the footprint that it currently has. We're trying to keep it contained, or trying to keep it from growing any further. Perimeter control is either dozer lines, hand lines, hose line, in a kind of a flanking type of a manner, and we're making our way to surround the fire. After perimeter control, we go into an extinguishment. Extinguishment is going back into the interior of the fire and now putting out the areas of fire within that respective perimeter. And finally, the last thing, but is what the news is always talking about, is containment. Containment is when we have a constructed control line completely around the entire fire, whether hose line, dozer line, hand cut line, and it's continuous from one end all the way to the other. So you can imagine now on almost a 24,000 acre fire, how long does it take to get that successive hose line completely around that fire? So in the initial stages of an incident, or here we are 10, 12 days into it, and you're seeing containment at 60 or 50%, depending on the fire you're looking at, that's the reason why. And obviously some of the terrain in some of the areas is very, very difficult to get to. And challenges with the terrain don't give us a pass on our containment line. We still have to put containment line through those very challenging areas. Some wildfire terms that you might also hear on social media or on the news is control. The fire is no longer advancing. Containment is like I just said. And then knockdown, you can have containment and actually have knockdown not be actually called yet. So you can have 100% containment, but if there's still visible smoke or visible flame anywhere within that 24,000 acres, we do not yet have knockdown. So after a 3-day period of no fire and no smoke is when we can actually call knockdown. Next slide, please. So the question has come up when we send so many resources to these large fires to help out both Los Angeles City and the respective fire in Los Angeles County, which was in Altadena. How do we maintain staffing levels in all of our other cities? So in the initial surge of these incidents, we have designated apparatus that are called strike team engines. There's one of those engines on the peninsula, and that's engine 106 near the mall. Engine 106 was deployed initially on the initial action of the fire. To To mitigate staffing levels on the peninsula, we then bring a reserve engine, an unstaffed, unmanned engine, back to Fire Station 106 on the peninsula, recall personnel from home to restaff that engine so we can maintain staffing levels on the peninsula. The peninsula, as you know, is a very severe hazardous zone as it relates to fire, so we definitely are concerned with drawing down resources from this area. The morning that this fire initiated, we had augmented staffing levels on the peninsula where there was an extra firefighter, an augmented firefighter position to every piece of equipment on the peninsula. We staffed the fire patrols with 3 people. We staffed a water tender, and of course the helipod tank was on the ready as well. So in order to maintain those staffing levels over time, we went from a 3-shift model to a 2-shift model. So we typically run 3 respective shifts with 3,500 personnel. So we took that 3rd shift, divided it in half, spread it to the other 2 shifts, and we worked basically every other day to maintain those staffing levels, both for the respective cities of Los Angeles County and also to maintain personnel at the fire as well. Next slide, please. There's been a lot of challenges and talk about the water system in the Palisades. These are the actual tanks in the Palisades that supply both the domestic and emergency water for that respective area. The issue that happened in the Palisades when there was difficulties with the hydrants was we had all of our fire engines attached to the domestic feed, which is for both homes and emergency use. They were exceeding the capacity of the tank. So what happening was the tanks were full. We drew the tanks down based on all the fire hydrants being used. The system in place to refill the tanks couldn't keep up with the demand that we were pulling from the system. So each one of those tanks is 1 million gallons, and they have 3 of them. The 3rd one is not in this picture. That was what the issue was with the water system in the Palisades. Now I can tell you, before we get to the slide, that the Palos Verdes Peninsula, because of Cal Water's great work, is not supplied in this manner. So we rely on and have multiple feeds coming into the peninsula, and it's a redundant system where no matter what the demand that we put on it, we will always have the supply coming in from one of the directions that Cal Water has provided. Next slide, please. This is the actual water reservoir in the Palisades area that is out of service. It's a 117 million gallon tank, which is meant to augment the 3 1 million gallon tanks that were having difficulties during the challenges of the fire. I won't go into it any more than that. It's still out of service as of today. It's in need of some repair, and hopefully they can mitigate that soon. Next slide, please. This is our reservoir on the Palos Verdes Peninsula. It's different in function than the one in the Palisades. This one here is not meant to augment Cal Water system. This is a storage facility, and this is a facility from Metropolitan Water District that has this here, that uses it as, it's actually a treated storage tank for domestic use, but it's not used to augment the system that's already in place. This reservoir is also out of service at the moment. I contacted Metropolitan Water. They said it is in the process of being repaired, but they did not give me an ETA on when this respective reservoir would be filled. I've also spoken in depth with Ralph Felix at Cal Water, who has articulated exactly how the peninsula is prepared for all of its water demands. And the next slides will show exactly what all of the cities, the fire department, and Cal Water is doing to make sure that we're well supplied. Next slide, please. And this is some of the homework that we've been doing as it relates to the water systems here. So obviously we already talked about the helipod, which was a great addition. It's automatic fill and high capacity. Cal Water has also completed a 7-mile-long Palos Verdes Peninsula reliability project in 2020, which is basically a large supply feeder that comes to the Palos Verdes Peninsula from the direction in which that reservoir used to supply. So basically, this new 7-mile long water reliability project makes the reservoir like a storage facility only, and it's not drawn upon for either domestic or emergency use. Next slide, please. And here's some more bullet points on exactly what Cal Water has been doing to make sure that our water system is extremely robust. So we have generators, and we have generators to back up generators in case any of our pumping stations were to have some sort of an issue. Lay flat hose. Lay flat hose is used to go in between water supply sources, just in case something should happen to some of the pipeline. We can pull the water main above ground and bypass the issue that's in the ground and continue the supply from that respective water main. So inspecting and testing hydrants regularly, I can tell you that the fire department in the month of March, and this is by tradition and we've always done this, we go out and inspect and exercise every single fire department on the peninsula. That includes a visual inspection to make sure it's in good repair. It's also to make sure that there's nothing that's precluding us from using it, that we have the proper clearances around it so our firefighters can access it. We take all the caps off, we open it up, and we flow the hydrant. And that's done on every single fire hydrant on the peninsula on an annual basis. They've also done a lot of upgrading of hydrants as part of their infrastructure improvement planning process, creating defensible space, vegetation management, and equipping its employees with portable extinguishing units called fire packs. So they have these fire packs on their respective utility trucks. If they should see something or create a start themselves, they have these packs on their vehicles to mitigate that incident very quickly. Next slide, please. So I'm going to move into evacuations now. Evacuations was another one of the challenges that we saw in the Palisades incident. So the fire department is relying heavily on this Genesis program, formerly known as Zone Haven. So as you can see here, that the Palos Verdes Peninsula is broken down into these respective zones. These zones can be accessed either via a desktop version or an application-based system from your cell phone. And it's imperative that individuals that live on the peninsula know exactly what zone that they live in. Myself, with the Sheriff Department, are going to be using this tool. If we have an incident and we need to evacuate, we are going to be evacuating by these respective zones. With the application-based system on your cell phone, it will show you a blue dot. That blue dot is exactly where you're standing and what zone you're in. So it's very easy to identify where you live and which zone your house is in. Or if you're out and about on the peninsula, it'll show you in real time exactly what zone you're in. Myself, the Sheriff Department, and the Office of Emergency Management can make changes to these zones based on key information that we want people on the peninsula, constituents, residents, et cetera, to know. So you can see here on the slide that some of the Portuguese Bend area is shaded differently. If you were to click on those shaded areas, it's going to give you information on what's happening in those respective zones. We can do the same thing in real time in any of the zones on the peninsula to inform people on what's happening in that zone and also instructions on what they should be doing in the zones in which they live. Next slide, please. This is an example of what we are going to be trying to avoid. So this is a picture from the Palisades incident. Some of you may have seen this on the news. This was an incident where the evacuating traffic overwhelmed the road system and created a gridlock situation. The decision was made for the cars to be left in those areas and for everybody to make their way down to PCH in the coastal area for safety. The issue is now our accessed roadway for our fire apparatus to get to the incident was now blocked. So the way we mitigated that incident was bringing this dozer in. The dozer cleared the street and allowed our fire apparatus then to make it to the fire area. Next slide, please. I lost another slide. So this was just another slide showing the importance of evacuations and how a coordinated evacuation is going to be essential for the success of the evacuation. What I would like to say about that is going back to the zones. If your respective zone is called for a mandatory evacuation, that is your time to evacuate. If you are in a neighboring zone and your zone has not yet been called, that is not your time to evacuate. So if you're gonna self-evacuate, thinking that you're gonna try to get a little bit ahead of the game, that could be a situation where if we have too many people self-evacuating outside of a mandate, you could overwhelm the road system. So being connected to Genesis, being connected to your social media sites and the directives by your city managers and your incident commanders is gonna be imperative to a successful controlled evacuation. Next slide, please. So a question that I've been getting is, are evacuation routes pre-identified? Can you post those? Can you tell us what they are so we know which way and how to evacuate? The answer to that is it's very, very difficult to do that because none of us know where the incident is going to start. We don't know the direction of the wind on that particular day. We don't know which direction the incident is going to go. So yes, there are identified routes that are going to be, of course, the main arteries on the peninsula. We're all very familiar with those main arteries are. Now, the direction of evacuation is going to be very incident dependent. So that's another reason it's going to be imperative that we're all connected to our information sites so we can get the key information on which routes we're using for evacuations and in which direction to evacuate. We want to make sure that we're not overwhelming all the road systems because don't forget, we're going to have many, many, many first responders that are trying to get into the peninsula as evacuees are trying to get off of the peninsula. So it's a balance that we're going to have to maintain. The only way we can do that is in a very controlled manner. Next slide, please. An interesting question that I've received is, will any of the trail systems on the peninsula be used as evacuation routes? And the answer to that question is no, because they're not monitored, they're not regulated, they're not patrolled. It's very difficult to tell who's using them and who's not, and that's how we end up potentially with missing persons. So definitely get the messaging out there that only approved evacuation routes will be utilized, the trail systems will not. Next slide, please. This is a picture of the Pano AI cameras. I'm sure we're all familiar that we have them. It's a great tool. It's a tool that could hopefully identify incidents in the incipient stage or the very, very beginning stages in order for us to make a response to keep those incidents small. The idea is rapid identification, rapid notification. It equals a rapid response by the fire department to keep that incident as small as we can. So there's 3 of these towers on the peninsula, and of course they're monitoring the peninsula 24/7. It pushes a notification to a control office location where it's monitored by some human intervention at that point. If the human on the other side of the intervention thinks that it's a viable smoke notification, then that notification is then sent to some of the stakeholders on the peninsula. I'm one of the recipients of these push notices, and then I will then look at the pictures, look at the notification, look at the direction of the camera as it relates to where the smoke is, and see if it necessitates a response from the fire department. There has been a couple that I've looked at and go, ooh, let me at least launch one engine as an investigation and then see what unfolds after that particular response. Next slide, please. That's the end of my formal presentation, but I'm open for any questions should you have any.
Okay, I have 2 other questions. One of them is specifically
Can you do me a favor speaking to the
One of them
microphone?
is specifically about Portuguese Bend. I would really like to know that we have staging areas that the fire department has their eye on ahead of time, because the roads are so narrow. It's been a problem with the fire engines in, you can't get in or out. So like right at the Pepper Tree Gate, there's that huge area that's flat. And I'd love to see that as part of 53's plan. And the other question I have is more personal. In terms of planting around your house, is having succulents right up close to the house gonna mitigate fire? Or is it just gonna slow things, or how do you feel about that?
Okay, so the first question is about staging areas. So we have many pre-designated staging areas on the peninsula, on all sides of the peninsula, and where we can send fire apparatus prior to engagement in a respective neighborhood. So just like a controlled evacuation, We also have a controlled ingress with our fire apparatus because we also don't want to clog the scene with too many apparatus and block our own guys into that respective fire area. So we are aware of the lot that you're speaking of. Another staging area is, of course, the Abalone Cove parking lot, and another one further down is obviously the San Vicente Lighthouse area is a great staging area, and also still allows us that reflex time to respond quickly to anywhere on the peninsula. Succulents next to your house. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in this respective brush clearance year. As we know, you're speaking about Zone 0. So Zone 0 last year was not enforceable by the fire department as it relates to Sacramento's legislation. So we'll see what they say this year as it relates to Zone 0. Now succulents, as we know, are very robust and really don't burn. So I don't think it would hurt, but I don't know if it would actually help either.
I'm hoping it would help.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
We have a place in Saratoga, California, which is also a high fire district. And the firemen there recommended a product called Barricade. I don't know if you've heard of it. I was just going to point that out and see if you guys concurred with that. My second question is with the destruction of Burma Road by the landslide, that was a fire road. How is that going to be replaced? What are you guys going to do we had the firehouse up there where we all rode on Burma Road or hiked on Burma Road. How does that affect us now?
So Barricade is a system to basically encapsulate your home with a product to inhibit it from getting direct flame impingement and then, of course, catching on fire. There's many products out there that are like this. Some of them work very, very well. Barricade's one of them. There's another one that's called Fire and Ice. There's another one that is a high expansion foam that looks like you're painting your house like with thick snow. They're all great products, and it can be of great assistance in the hardening effort of that residence. Some of them are very expensive, but then so is your home. So that's something that you guys can think about individually, but they do work and they do help. Burma Trail is not something that the fire department is going to use for any kind of fire mitigation efforts. It's just, right now, it's just a little too precarious. And we have other means of accessing the areas within the Burma Trail, mostly with our aircraft and our ground crews that hike in.
Chief Kane, it's worth noting, although Burma Road and many of the trails in the preserve are not passable at the moment because of the landslide, there are new paths that have been created as part of our winterization and some of our mitigation measures, and it may be worth working with the fire department to kind of check out some new routes that are available in case you need to, because there are some pretty wide access routes that are now available.
Yeah, definitely something to look at, and I know Cal Water has also been working on Burma Trail as well, is trying to restore it.
Yes, one more question. Hi, good evening. How is your calculating if PB Drive South goes down during an emergency? How does that impact other roads? And what is your backup plans if PB Drive South is out?
Okay, you're talking about PB Drive South as it relates to where, like the ski jump area? Is that what we're talking about? Yeah.
Yes.
So it would be a case then of, if you did have a separation in the road system right there, then of course those on one side of the road systems are going to be evacuating through the corridors on that side, and of course the other ones would be evacuating obviously in the other direction. Now you're probably going to think, well, you don't know where the advancing fire front is coming from, and I will tell you that our aircraft will protect those evacuation routes at all costs. So like I said before, life mode. Evacuations are considered life mode. So if we have to dedicate all of our aircraft to maintain the safety of these evacuation routes, that's exactly what we're going to do. Now, just to keep in mind, on just a first alarm brush response, that's our first go at putting personnel at an incident, you're getting 7 aircraft. That's on the first alarm. On the second alarm, there's an additional 7 aircraft. So we're going to have a ton of aircraft that are coming in this direction. Another question that I've been getting is, can your helicopters, if for whatever reason or if needed, dip or suck water from the ocean? And the answer to that question is yes, they can. So you probably saw on the Palisades incident our super scoopers, those are the red and white fixed wing aircraft, and they were dipping into the Pacific Ocean and then taking that water and then dropping it onto the fire.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chief Kane. I appreciate it. Is there any other questions? Okay. If you guys have any other questions, please let us know so we can circle back with you, and then we'll have it answered. Thank you for your sacrifice in protecting the citizens, Chief Kane. I really
Thank you very much.
appreciate it.
Appreciate that.